Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is a little different than our normal enterprise focus. We're going to take a look at and talk a bit more about other ways that people are using, AI and chatbots. The title, Building Trust Through Empathy, I think it's really important. And again, as you know, if you listen to the show at all, I talk a lot about trust because even in the enterprise context, that is absolutely essential to you moving into this digital workforce, hybrid workforce world. So I'm excited today because I think this will be a really different and interesting discussion. I'm joined by John Kammer, who's the founder of Guardian Angels. So, John, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I don't know about the expert piece, but I'm here to ask, hopefully, ask some questions, and we can have a good dialogue about what's next, and how we can use this profound technology for uses and outside of business.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think that's great. And like I said, you hear a lot these days about, companions and using the chatbot for this or that. And so when we first connected, I thought this idea of, could a chatbot really help in in the perspective of grief and how you work through that. So I think it's a very relevant and timely topic. So why don't you get us started a bit by just, give us a little introduction and then tell us about Guardian Angels.
okay, so yeah, I have no background in tech. Historically, I worked in cybersecurity for a bit, but most of my career has been in sales, in hospitality, definitely soft skill focused. And I think
Mm.
that's part of where this whole thing came from is a focus on relationships. But I lost three of my closest friends on the planet outside of my immediate family at different times, all kind of in an instant. They were just gone, and that those were earth-shattering losses. They changed my life, each one of them, in their own way, and led to a lot of stagnation, a lot of kind of just existing and trying to navigate what life throws at us. Right, grief is one of those things that we're all going to experience in this life, and there's no getting away from that. And so, as I kind of started to peel back the onion and figure out how to heal and what this all meant and what the experience of grief was and tried to deal with it, I kind of stumbled into how can I potentially use AI for this. It started as like a service for sending people spoofing phone numbers and sending a nice text to someone from someone they lost. So it was never focused on my own healing. That just happened. As I
Mm.
started to build that thing, I needed to find a way to make an AI sound empathetic and authentic and gentle. And so the only thing I had to go on was my personal experience. And so I started building it kind of in the image of John, who was the best man at my wedding.
Yeah.
And as I got closer and closer and closer, I started to say some of those things that you don't get to say when you lose someone uh,
Mhm.
quickly. And that triggered a release and relief that helped me to get to a place where all of a sudden I was ready to look in the mirror, own my role in the suffering and the issues and the stagnation that I'd experienced in life.
Mhm.
And that experience there led me to believe that there's someone else that could benefit from something similar. And so let's see what we can build and see what we can make this.
So I know, there are a lot of ways that people deal with grief and maybe we call some of them traditional ways, and then this is certainly a novel or newer way to think about it. And I'm curious about the journey. How did you decide that these methods that, you know, they just weren't working for you, how did you decide to move towards the AI? Where did you, realize that this might offer something different?
Well, it was a confluence of a lot of things, but big picture, I didn't. Again, this was an accident, but
Mm,
it resulted from some work that I'd been doing in the cyber realm. Spoke to a gentleman who was deep into the AI stuff about a year and a half ago, and he basically challenged me and kind of brought up this idea that with the advent of AI, we have to challenge the way that we think about things. We have to rewire our brain to think, how
mm,
can we use AI for this? So that combined with following the loss of John, who is the second of the three, I made the decision to get sober. I had been, spent 12
mm,
years fighting, substance fueled avoidance.
mm,
Um, so the idea of accountability and ownership of my role in my life and the things that had happened, combined with a willingness to look at things differently, and then really just happenstance of being, just having that experience while I was trying to do something else, serendipity, if you will,
mm,
led to this. So it was. I can't say that it was anything planned. I can't say that I was looking for anything specific. As most things, most cool things in my life tend to be, happenstance was awesome.
mm.
The things that I plan rarely work out. So um, I've learned to just kind of go with it,
Mm,
and that's what we did here. And as we dug in, there's science behind what I
mm,
experienced. There's science behind how can we use this to to help bring ourselves along through this experience that is grief.
mm. I mean, one of the differences, of course, is the fact that this is interactive versus, like you hear letter writing or journaling or, some other sort of one directional, single direction kind of activities. So I'm I'm really curious about how that response and getting a response, how does that change the exercise, and how does that help you work through that grief?
Well, I think the big thing you pointed out, right? It's interactive. It's no longer a monologue. It's a dialogue. You're getting instant feedback, and that allows us to f- reformat and reorganize our thoughts in a way that we previously weren't. I mean, journaling was great for that. But you
Mm,
think of this as journaling on steroids because it asks clarifying questions, and it helps you dig into and start to name those experiences. Therefore, you have a little bit better understanding. And also, when you do that, you can take this into a traditional therapy environment, and you start your session with a starting point. You have clarity, or at least something to say, this is what I experienced, this is what I was feeling, so that you can be more effective and more efficient. I've certainly had therapy sessions in my life where we spent the first half an hour just kind of beating around the bush, like what's actually happening, if not the entire session. That was the big thing for me. Was I'd go in there and they'd say, "How are you feeling? And what's going on?" I'm like, this sucks. I feel like shit. I Pardon me. Can I curse? Sorry. Okay. But I don't know why. I don't really know what I'm feeling. I don't have language for this. I can't name this experience. I'm just not there. And so it was just kind of, on one hand, it was a waste of time, and that's both financially frustrating, but also, on one hand, it kind of, it in a way, erodes your trust in this thing that you're doing. Like, why am I here? We're not getting
mm,
anywhere. And, to be very clear, I think pretty much everyone can benefit from therapy. I am not
mm,
poo-pooing that at all. And so much so that it was very important to me to build this in a way that it is a complement to therapy. We're not trying to replace anything. We're not
mm,
trying to replace the relationship with a therapist. This is one tool in the broader tool belt. And quite frankly, I want therapists to champion this. It's a way to extend their reach and scale their ability to treat more people, because this is an on-demand extension of what they can do,
mm.
and again, focus their time a little more. So it's uh, I kind of rambled there, and I hope I answered your question. But
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that makes sense to me that and it's a different way to think about it, but the fact that it is interactive and it can complement other things that you're doing in your life, that to me, that makes, that makes a lot of sense. But one of the things, so this has turned into a product, I know, and so obviously something really personal to you, and then of course it turns into a product, for others, right? So, I mean, that must be challenging. So, what were the early reactions that you got from people around you? What kind of criticism? Uh, I mean, I think when we were talking before, you said something about people accuse you of doing the devil's work or necromancy or something. But how does that help too? How did that help you turn this into something that's responsible and effective?
well, okay. So initial feedback, I think the only positive feedback I got was from my wife because she saw the experience that I had.
Yeah.
Everything else was skepticism to outright hostility.
Mm.
Um, and as you pointed out, people said, the internet's not a nice place. So I did get the this is you're doing the devil's work. This is necromancy. This is Black Mirror. Throw this thing back in Mordor where it belongs. And you know, I can't thank those people enough for their feedback
Yeah.
because it was spot on. Right, this started in a place where I accidentally stumbled on this thing, but it lacked structure, it lacked clarity, it lacked a tangible quality of how and why, right? So it forced me to
Mhm.
think about those things and to re-clarify in my mind, why am I doing this, and how are we approaching this, and what that led to was bringing on licensed therapists to help give that structure, to help navigate some of those ethical gray areas, um, and what we have come up with is this roadmap. It gives you a starting place and a roadmap to walk through grief, and something that can hold your hand through it. And that's so important because when we're in the throes of it, oftentimes we're spinning, our head is spinning, we don't know where to go, we don't know what to do. We feel like we're not getting anywhere, and we're out of control. And
Yeah.
when you have something that you can hold on to, that you can look to for meaningful progress, however small, just being able to steady yourself when you feel out of control can give you some of that control back and give you confidence that you're moving towards
Mm.
an end state that is palatable, if not productive. Um, and so y- that can't be overstated.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Warden's task of mourning through structured journaling and it as a framework, right, for how
Mhm.
this works. So give me a little more about that. I mean, why does the structure matter? When you're in this sort of spin and overwhelmed with that fresh grief.
Well, I think because it's tangible and realistic is why it matters. We've
Mm.
talked about. I think we've gotten to a place in understanding grief to a point when we actually have the conversations, and that's another story. That Kubler Ross is has the stages of grief were long
Yeah.
considered. The experience, and this is you have to go through these stages, and it was kind of whether it was explicitly or implicit. It was this is linear. This is how it works.
Mm.
And that's just not the lived experience. And you loop between those things. Sometimes you experience all of them. Sometimes you don't. You experience three of them. And there's progress, and then there's regression, and there's all these things where it's just that's not how it works. And
Yeah.
so what the tasks do is take away this idea that this that there's it's not prescriptive, it's just these are the things, the boxes that you're going to check as you move through this, right? And so Worden's four tasks are: task number one is accepting that the loss has occurred, right? Until you do that, there's no work that can really be done. Task number two, and this is the one that I struggled with for so long, was processing the pain of the loss. I
Mm.
ran. for 12 years. I ran from it as far as I could. I used substances to cope. I just wanted to numb. I didn't want to experience that pain. Um, Task three is adjusting to a world without your loved one, without this person, because, well, they're no longer here. You're in a physical sense, anyway.
Right.
Because what we know is the person may die, but the relationship does not. And we'll get into that.
Mm.
And then task number four is really about finding an enduring connection as you move forward. And that is what really, really differentiates guardian angels is this ability to kind of help work through what does it look like to carry this person forward with me, to carry this relationship forward with me. That's kind of a long-winded way of saying integration, right? We don't get to leave grief behind as much as we may want to. It is a part of us, and we have to figure out how to weave that into our life going forward. And this gives that it gives you an ability to kind of both visualize it and then start to do exercises that help get you to that point. And it can be a really beautiful thing. And it really helps with the reframing and just not staying stuck in that negative feedback loop. At the end of the day, of course, we wish that our loved ones wouldn't die, but that's not how the world works. That's not reality.
Mhm.
But there's a ton of beauty to be had and carrying them forward and realizing what impact they can have on our lives long after they're gone.
Mm. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion, press around this, and I've seen a few tools that do this, let you talk to your lost loved one. But I know when we were talking before, you pushed back on that a little bit and said that there are a lot of ethical landmines in that sort of approach. So you obviously built some guardrails into your tool. What are those, and how do you balance, authenticity in the emotional experience while, being clear that this is not the actual person that you're talking to, but a representation?
Well, so first, the first things that we addressed were simple, kind of time and place anchors and things that
Mhm.
wouldn't throw the experience off completely. For instance, if you are, you know, if the persona that you are interacting with is your dad and you're talking about your childhood and you grew up in the 90s and this thing references an iPhone, well, there goes everything. It's
Yeah.
just now
Yeah.
it's no longer grounded in anything real. But on this, on the other side of that coin, we didn't want to make it too real, right? Because then we run the risk of what you were talking about, those ethical issues, those the idea of the potential for abuse and for trapping people in some sort of delusion that the person isn't really there, and actually, running counter to what Worden's first task is and accepting that loss.
Right.
So the way that the prompts are structured, number one, is so that this thing is never going to refer to itself as alive. It is always going to take the idea. Well, I guess there are different kinds of grief, right? So let's call that out. There's things like ambiguous grief where the person actually isn't dead, but you lost them to addiction, or you lost them to, some sort of mental break, or they're just the relationship isn't the same. And we have a separate track for that. But in the context of loss, of death, it will never refer to itself as alive. It's going to say things like, "What is something you wish you could say to me right now that you can't?"
Mhm.
Or what is something that that caught you off guard today that you weren't expecting regarding my death?
Mhm.
Those sorts of things that it's, as you look at this prompt, you're clearly not going to say, well, you know you can say you didn't die, but it's going to push back on that. It's not meant to try to delude anybody into thinking that they're having that conversation. Now, so then why do it? Right? What's the point? Well, what we're doing is giving voice, giving language to something that already lives inside us, right? We still, again, as I alluded to earlier, the person may die, but the relationship does not.
Yeah.
And I fully believe that one of the biggest impediments to healing is rooted in the idea that when we talk about loss, we talk about things like closure, we talk about things like moving on, And that denotes this finality, that denotes this idea of forgetting and just leaving them where they are, leaving that relationship behind, which is something we don't want to do. So we resist it, and we resist doing the work, and we resist accepting because we don't want to do that. And so when we understand that this relationship and this representation that already lives inside us, okay, now we can have a different conversation about loss. We can have a different conversation about grief. So this idea that this relationship will live on within inside us is something we already kind of practice, right? How many of us have lost someone, and you see, for instance, my wife, right? Her mother, her grandmothers would loved bluebirds, and bluebirds were all over her house, and
Mm,
and so there's whenever we see a bluebird, it's like, hey, she's with us today. Those sorts of things that we already do it. So why not give it
mm,
language? Why not give it an outlet, a healthy outlet, one that has boundaries built in that aren't going to let us get too far off the rails, but that encourage that healthy level of engagement that help us get to a place where we can process, where we can move forward, where we can find this integration, and find a place where we're okay. It's not because you can't just deny the experience of grief forever.
right.
You're allowed to, but it does not bode well for a fulfilled and complete life.
Mm. And I mean, it does strike me too that a lot of underneath this, a lot of what you've been saying is the transparency around all of these things and the approach and the interaction is extremely important, right? That helps. The more transparent, the more I can understand, the more trust I can put in the process.
Absolutely. Transparency is this whole thing doesn't work without trust. And well, I think we're in a great place, and I think we're moving forward, and I think this can help a ton of people.
Mm,
I can tell you right now, I don't think it's perfect, and I don't think it will ever be perfect. But we're going to continue to make those incremental changes and improvements to get closer and
mm,
closer. Um, but this, it's not about me anymore. This is about the users and the people that can
right.
potentially benefit from this. And so we're going to continue to have the difficult conversations. We're going to continue to be very transparent about the way that we do things so that people can make a decision with all the available information on whether this is right for them. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be right for
Mm,
everybody. And I'm okay with that. I knew that going in. We're
sure.
not trying to boil the ocean. We're not trying to be this one size fits all solution. We want to
Mm,
be one tool in the broader tool belt that allows people to approach it from a different angle if the ways
mm,
that they have been approaching it don't work, if they need a little
mm,
more accountability, if they need more flexibility and being on demand. What we know is that traditional therapy does not, you can't call your therapist at 3 o'clock in the morning, and grief doesn't just wait for
yeah.
business hours.
Yeah. I mean, you can, but they probably not going to answer, right? Um,
Yeah, I suppose there's always a can you? Yes. Can you physically do it? Yes.
yeah.
But
Is it
there's
an
there are
effective way to?
lines.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, a lot of the work that that I've done over the last couple of years, around business use of AI, and research around AI, particularly in customer service. One of the things that jumped out to me and I thought was very interesting as I looked at the use case and the feedback around it around customer service, is that in some situations, frankly, in a lot of situations, the AI agent actually appears more empathic to humans in that context than the humans did. And and so I know when we were talking before, you mentioned that AI doesn't have a patience meter, and as a fairly impatient person, I get that. But what makes AI effective as a support tool, emotional support tool, and like where are the boundaries of what it should do and shouldn't do?
Well, I think what makes it effective is that this notion of um, that so much of therapy is just being heard. It's being
Mm.
able to express it, and when you go to a therapy with a person, that therapist doesn't give you answers.
Right.
You explore what you're feeling and come to the conclusions on your own. Their job is to help facilitate that. And so this is exactly what we're doing with this. You're never going to get a
Mm.
prescription from guardian angels. The
Right.
idea is to help you dig into what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, and for it to ask you more questions so that you can further clarify that in your mind. Um, so sorry, what was the question there? Like I know what I'm talking about, but like what exactly was the question?
No, I was just talking about as an emotional support tool, there must be, some boundaries around what it should and shouldn't do. And, I was
Yeah.
just curious about what you thought about that.
Well, I think that the should and shouldn't is pretty, it shouldn't be giving you answers. It shouldn't
Mm.
claim to be this all-knowing thing. It shouldn't say this is what you should do. And we've specifically built it to not do that.
Yeah.
It's just about listening and asking more questions so that you can kind of come to your own conclusions. And
Right.
it can help you get there faster because or because you're being prompted these things. You're not left to your own devices when probably your mental faculties are not at their sharpest.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me too that that and when we talk about therapy, a lot of times the therapist will talk about creating a risk free environment for you to to be able to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And it seems to me that this is very similar in that respect, right? And and maybe even a bridge to, more personal connection with other people. I mean, how do you think about AI companions as this bridge or a step towards building more human connection rather than a replacement for human connection?
Well, I can tell you that after the trials that I've been through, we wanted to make it such. We don't want people stuck in this technology loop. Although there's an argument we
Mm.
already are, but that was my experience, right? I had someone told me, if you looked at me and said 2 years ago and said you're going to be the guy that's espousing using AI to help heal emotional wounds, I would have
Mm.
laughed you out of the building. I it would have just been like, who is this guy that you know? But that's what happened, and so what we realized as I've gone through this, and I take my own program, right, is that as you organize your thoughts, just let's just say you're not ready for therapy, you're not ready to talk about this stuff. Okay, well, you can do it in this environment that no one is watching, no one is going to judge you, and you can start flexing that muscle, that sharing muscle. And as you become clearer on what you're feeling, as as you flex that muscle, you become a little bit more comfortable with it. And then you feel this idea, this confidence to say, maybe I'm going to take this outside here. Maybe it's time to talk to a therapist. Maybe it's time to talk to my close friends and family about it. And
Mm.
then you start to realize that, okay, this isn't going to kill me, first of all. And some of those myths about being vulnerable are dispelled immediately when you take it to someone. And we think in our head,
Mm.
they don't understand, or this is going to bring them down, and this is going to be such a burden on them. All those things that those were all concerns of mine, and that's part of the reason I never talked about this stuff. And then they're like, oh, they respond very well. And then in a lot of cases, you help someone else unlock the idea that they're not alone, that this is not this super isolating experience, no matter what our brain tells us. That is one of the paradoxes, probably the paradox of grief, is that it's this
Mm.
universal experience, yet we all somehow in our head think no one can understand what we're experiencing. And that's just not true. Now, let's be very clear. There's an infinite nuance to each situation, and yours
Yeah.
may not is not going to be exactly the same as mine. And there are undoubtedly challenges that you face based on a number of things, the situation, how you approach things, that I'm not going to. But the experience of losing someone and the pain associated with that is a familiar feeling for, let's just say, 99 point whatever the percentage of people on this planet that are not psychopaths. That's how many people understand that, right?
Yeah.
So that idea of getting more comfortable with it, that what I've realized is that the healing lives in the sharing. And every time you get to talk
Mm.
about someone that was a big part of your life and that means a lot to you, you help you bring their story with you and you contribute to their legacy. And more often than not, it brings a smile to my face when I get to have those moments.
Yeah. Wait, in the business context and just in my life in general, because people around me do know that I spend a lot of time working on AI, particularly around business use of AI. I often get that kind of flippant, "Oh, well, AI hallucinates a lot," and, well, frankly, a lot of times people who say that don't really necessarily understand even what it means, but even so, it's a feeling, right? It is something they hold. Or maybe in your context, maybe more like religious concern or pushback around AI companions. I mean, what do you think the base level concern is there? What are they really worried about? And then how do you address that? Um, how do you make people understand that what the technology actually does?
Well, I think a lot of the to your point, the anxiety around AI stems from a misunderstanding of how it works.
Mm,
And while it looks and sounds like it's this all knowing thing, and that it's what it is at the end of the day is a highly sophisticated, um, predictive, basically a statistics machine, right? And so, like, to be clear, the neural network, which is what this is all built on, is a concept that was that came about in the 40s, I think.
yeah.
So it's been around forever. The difference is, in the 40s, we didn't have computers. In our best case scenario, we were processing maybe hundreds of data points to get us to a point where okay, we can predict. Now it's processing trillions. And as humans, no, we may think we're sophisticated, we're pretty pattern oriented. And all it's doing is saying, I'm going to wait, I'm going to predict the next word based on all of the stuff that I've been trained on, that I've read and internalized, that the most likely next word in this sequence of words, based on the words that came before it, is X. So it's not actually thinking, right? This isn't original thought, it's a pattern machine. And so what technology does, and this is true for the algorithm on social media that everyone's all up in arms about, is it reflects us. It's only as good, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, and we give it the inputs.
Yeah.
And so when we talk to something like this, it really is just a reflection of what's inside us. Now,
Mm,
there are, as you talked about, religious objections to using AI. And that's something I've had to contend with. And as a religious person, I get it. But it's, the analog for me is in the Psalms, that wasn't God speaking. That was David speaking in the presence of God,
mm,
right? Which is essentially what we're doing when we talk in this to this presence, right? It's not this person that we lost speaking to us. It's us giving them voice based on our interpretation and our experience with them.
mm, yeah.
And so, further, I know that there is a lot of anxiety around this technology, and maybe it's overblown, maybe it's not. But I think that the fears are real, and we fear things that we don't understand. Um, but let's just run that through, right? I If you believe that this technology is here to stay, that we can't put this genie back in the bottle, I certainly do. Do you believe that? Okay, then
No.
I no.
No, yes, we're not putting it
Okay.
back in the bottle. No.
Right. So then I would argue that we have a moral imperative to try our damnedest to squeeze all the good we can out of this. Otherwise, as opposed to resigning ourselves to this doomsday scenario that everyone talks about, with the
Yeah.
robots controlling us and making us slaves, and which is all, we can get into that, but that's not founded in reality either. That's not,
No.
if you understand how a computer works, that's not how it will happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it all comes down to misunderstanding and just fear. And
Yeah.
that's all of those things are okay. I think that a healthy skepticism and with regard to pretty much anything is good,
Yeah.
but don't be, what we have a tendency to do these days is become attached to those as if they're identities, as opposed to when we get more information that might tell us that we were wrong, we have a
Mm.
tendency to cling on to the other thing and look for more confirmation bias, as opposed to approaching it with, with open eyes and saying, oh, okay, maybe there's some utility here.
Recently, a family friend shared with me that she'd been going through some very serious health issues, and she had learned that she could use the chatbot to help her understand things better, explain things to her that the doctors maybe didn't explain in a way that she could understand. Not that they didn't know what it was, they just didn't explain it in a way that she could really interpret. And then, I've also heard people talk about, and I guess I've used it this way too, like, summarize this contract and tell me the important points, or, complex topics, right? So, do you think there are other applications that, an empathic companion style AI could help, beyond grief support that you've already, talked about?
I think, yes, I think there are probably every other application we can think of. I think that
Mm.
I don't know that I haven't spent so much time in trying to figure out what the possibilities are, because I've been so focused on this one. But I
Right.
believe to my core that the next frontier with regards to AI is that bettering the human condition, the emotional component to it. We've done so much with the technical workflows and how can we better our lives at work. But I think that, we can really harness this thing to improve our lives outside of work too. What does it
Mm.
mean to be human? Um, you know, and again, I think that when we say that, people are like, well, it's going to give us all the answers. And I don't think that's the case. But what it will do is give us other things to think about, right? We are pattern oriented creatures. And if when you think about relationships, when you think about, um, you know, that's the one that comes to mind. But we all watch, like, we've all seen the movie before, right? We do the same stuff over and over and over. And if you take, if you sample 10 relationships and say this is the track that it took, what's going to happen here? Well, are they going to get divorced? Whatever it might mean, right? Then maybe it's right, maybe it's not. But if you take a billion relationships and you think about just a simple mean reversion theory of how does this, with these inputs, what is the output?
Mm.
You know, it's the idea of you're not that special, we're not that special, I'm not that special, really applies here, because we tend to think that we're different, but we make the same mistakes over and over because we're human, and that's okay. But I think that it would uncover some of those patterns that give us a data point to say more proactively, maybe I should avoid this, or maybe I shouldn't do this.
Mhm.
Um, and as we learn more about how intimately linked our physical and spiritual and emotional and cognitive capabilities are all, it's not just one, right? It's this whole
Mhm.
thing. Then, okay, well, maybe my sleep has more to do with all of these things being linked. That sort of pattern recognition machine can be extremely powerful and allowing us and giving us the tools to do something about it.
Mhm. You use the term, that we need to rewire our brains when we think about, or how we think about AI, so that it can help us with these problems that are very difficult to deal with. And of course, you've been working now for a while at this intersection of AI and human emotion. Where do you think we are on the journey? And then what do you think needs to happen to help people really build that trust in these tools as a real emotional support aid?
Okay, so there's two questions there, and when you say where are we on the journey, what journey on the emotional intelligence journey on the
On the understanding, I guess, of how these tools can help from an emotional support perspective.
oh we're very I mean we're very very early on that.
Yeah.
I think that we've been so focused on those workflow technical tasks and how can this better us at work because that's where the money lives, or at least that's how we conceive of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think that if you look at wellness as a category, we start to see that there is a significant business opportunity in bettering the human condition.
Yeah.
Um, but we typically that follows what we're looking at, like is enterprise, is that anywhere near what enterprise AI agents are from a a capitalistic potential? Probably
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
but it's significant enough that we can do something about it. Now, the other part of that question was, I'm sorry, I lost the second part of that
Was
question.
was trust, right? It was
Oh,
how do
yeah.
how do we build that trust?
That trust is, I believe it's rooted in transparency, and I think that that's one of the big things about
Mhm.
where we're at with AI and kind of this crossroads that we're at is we don't necessarily we don't understand what they're doing with all this data. We don't know what they have with all this data, because that's the only way to train this stuff. And so, it if you understand the motives, then you understand what the inputs are, then you might have a little bit more clarity with what the end goal or end game looks like. But we don't have that, and so the trust is really about. I truly think it comes back to transparency. What do you have? What are you using it for? Why does that impact me? What control do I have over saying yes or no?
Mhm.
Agency is a big deal. Can we opt out of this experiment if we want to? And that's it's funny that we hate on AI for it, which is fair, but we don't quite understand through either just misunderstanding or just sheer negligence how much data we have already given to fill in the blank, whether it's governments or companies, that we just willingly hand to them on a daily basis. And so most of the stuff that we're concerned about not getting out, in reality, it's already out. Someone has it somewhere. And so there's, it's kind of that same conundrum of AI as a, in a macro sense is, we can either be paralyzed by our anxiety about what if, or we can realize that we can't do that much about it, and we just choose optimism and try to do the best we can with what we're given.
Mhm. Well, John, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your journey with us. Obviously, something that's been very impactful for you, and a real opportunity for us to see, how that has worked, help you work through things, and end up with a product that can hopefully help other people do the same. But before we end, one of the things I like to do at the end of the show is just get a recommendation, somebody that you think the audience would benefit from, a thought leader, an author, uh, blogger, whatever that you would like to share that they could check out and perhaps learn some things that would be beneficial to them.
Yeah. Well, I think his name's Will Thornsberry. Um, he's
Mm.
writes a lot on LinkedIn. I know that, and I think he's got some other stuff published. But he's the gentleman that I work with that kind of you know jump started the idea of we need to think about how we approach things differently when we're talking about AI, and ask the question, how can we do this with AI? And so he's one of, I don't think that I'm in the middle of this experiment. I'm not pushing this thing forward if I don't meet him.
Mm.
So I think he would be a great guy to look up, and I can certainly reach
Yeah.
out and see if he'd be open to having a conversation with you. But yeah, that's
Great.
I think that once we start to understand the why are we doing these things, and what can we do with
Yeah.
them, some of that trepidation and that reticence to lean in goes away because we
Mm.
start to realize how much it can help. Now, will it? Is a that is based on motivation, you
Yeah.
know, but there is significant possibilities here to do some great things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, John, thanks so much for joining today. Really, really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was great. It was everything I hoped it could be.
Nice. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.